Salutations, respected viewers, or should I say Yakida. I'm George from Ireland, and I'm standing in front of Henry Morton Stanley's house. Perhaps behind me in the distance, in between the bars, you can see the little blue circle. That's a blue plaque to mark Henry Morton Stanley's house. I'm in London, the Westminster area. Whitehall is just that away, the street with all the government ministries on it, and the River Thames is not 100 yards yonder. The Ministry of Defence is that away, but I shan't film it for reasons you might guess. Although I don't think there's actually a law against it. Come on. Thousands of people walk past it every day, very easily to covert film. So Stanley, he was born in Wales, and his name was originally John Rowlands, and he was born outside of holy matrimony, which in those days was considered disgraceful. Obviously it reflects no discredit on him or indeed his parents, but back then it carried a severe stigma. So he's brought up in a workhouse, sort of an orphanage, like an Oliver Twist situation. And when he was an adolescent, he emigrated to the United States. He landed at New Orleans, and he was taken in by a middle-aged man called Mr. Stanley. And so John Rowlands changed his name to Henry Morton Stanley in honor of this man who was a father figure to him. I don't think there's anything untoward about their relationship, but I could be mistaken. So anyway, Henry Morton Stanley, as he was known thenceforth, he volunteered for the Confederate Army during the American Civil War. He fought in that cause, and he continued to have anti-black attitudes throughout his life. But such despicable racism was not uncommon at the time throughout the white world. So that was over, and then he made his name as a newspaperman, writing for the International Herald Tribune, various New York newspapers. Anyway, the proprietor of these sent him to Africa because Dr. David Livingstone was a celebrated figure at the time. He was such a celebrity for bringing the Bible to the benighted heathen of Africa, as they would have seen at the time, traveling around what's now Zimbabwe, Zambia, into what's now Tanzania, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and so forth. So people had lost contact with Dr. Livingstone for some time. So Stanley, he sailed to what's now Tanzania. He was also on the island, the island of Zanzibar is part of Tanzania now, and he befriended Tipu Tip. Now Tipu Tip was from that part of the world, a Swahili-speaking man, a Muslim. Now a lot of people in the interior were not Muslims, but some Muslims held it was entirely acceptable to abduct and enslave people who were not of the faith. Obviously Christians had done the same, occasionally done to other Christians as well, so whether they're infidels, well, we can just reduce them to thraldom. Anyhow, so he relied on Tipu Tip to get to the interior because, you know, he had the men, he had the guns, the contacts, all the rest of it. So using his guides and bearers to carry all their necessaries, they ventured deep into the interior of Africa, which then people would not have blushed to call the Dark Continent. Anyway, so after a couple of years, he'd heard on the Bush Telegraph that Dr. Livingstone was around, and he walked into a village where he saw a rather drawn and elderly white man. There wasn't another white within 100 miles of there, and Stanley greeted him with the immortal words, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume." So that was that. So it was a sensation. It was a scoop. Obviously, it took some weeks to get back to the coast and to telegraph the news to the United States, and the story broke. But however, Livingstone died shortly after meeting Stanley. I think his heart was removed, and the rest of him was buried where he died, and his heart was brought back by two of his faithful servants to the United Kingdom. He's buried in Westminster Abbey, if I've got that right. So obviously Livingstone is memorialised. There's a town in Zambia which still bears his name. Blantyre in Malawi is after his area of Scotland. I know there's a town in Scotland called Livingston, but Livingstone's family take their name from the town. It's not the Scots town takes its name from Dr. Livingstone. And Ken Livingstone, the ultra-left British politician, so far as I know, is no relation, even collaterally, of the physician. So that was that. So Stanley, he went back to the United States. He eventually returned to his native land, but came back in triumph. He was a self-made man, and he entered politics. He joined the Liberal Unionists. So the Liberal Party had split in 1886 over the issue of Home Rule for Ireland. So the majority of the Liberal Party under William Gladstone was in favour of devolving government to Ireland, and Ireland still remaining part of the United Kingdom, very similar to Scotland's current status within the United Kingdom. And then about a third of the party decamped, led by a radical Joe Chamberlain, the Marquis of Hartington and others, and they became Liberal Unionists, and they acted as allies of the Conservative Party. So the Liberal Unionists and the Conservatives eventually merged just before the First World War to be known as Conservative and Unionists, often they're sometimes called Unionist. But anyway, so he was a Liberal Unionist MP, and so this house was very convenient for him because it's only half a mile from Parliament. You can't see Parliament, but it'd be behind that building there. So he died shortly after the turn of the century. That is him, but many people regard him as a charlatan, as a shameless self-publicist, but he certainly pulled himself up by his bootstraps. He started with the most impropitious beginnings in life, but ascended to great fame and consequences as a dint of his endeavours. That's enough about Henry Morton Stanley.